Hello and welcome to Author Talk with me, LG Thompson. Now, the idea behind Author Talk is that I'll be answering the kind of questions that authors very often get asked by readers. Today is it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about Edinburgh, which is the capital city of Scotland. It's a city which I've had a bit of a mixed relationship with in the past, but somewhere that I've come to find quite an exciting place. But before we get on to that, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. One of the questions I most often get asked is, where do you get your ideas? And if you've been watching any of these videos, you'll understand by now that this is many a place is the answer to that. Ideas kind of strike me all the time, like I'm always making notes about things. You see in the wall there behind me, actually all round my studio, even in the window which is in front of my laptop screen, covered in post-it notes. Lots of ideas that occur to me, things that sometimes just little phrases, expressions that I might want to use, sometimes things that I might want to look into further, like down the line, but like don't have time at the moment, or you know, just notes and things to myself really. And over my shoulder here, I don't know if you can see it here, but I'll zoom into it for you. It says Burke and Hare. Burke and Hare were two body snatchers operating out of Edinburgh in the early 19th century. So, well, I'll start with that. Yeah, let's talk about my, like I said something about my mixed relationship with Edinburgh. I was never crazy on Edinburgh. As a little child, like growing up, I grew up on the west coast of Scotland. We would go through Edinburgh to do the usual sort of things, visit the castle. It's quite a boring castle. I mean, it looks pretty stunning from the outside. I didn't find it particularly interesting inside. We'd get taken to the zoo, that kind of thing. It was a kind of very touristy place to go and visit. And then as I got older, I went through to the art galleries. The art galleries are stunning, really fantastic art galleries. But I was never mad about Edinburgh. And I had some nice nights out there and things like that, but the place just never quite grabbed me. And I was down a few years ago. I was down for a work thing. It was a conference, and I was there the day before and just wandering about and looking at things, and I was seeing all these big Georgian buildings in the new town. I just kind of get really mad, kind of thinking, God, those buildings are so bloody smug, so pleased with themselves, with all their nice conformity and symmetry, and just all looking, well, look at us. It really kind of irritated me. And somebody had suggested that like, perhaps the problem was me, and I was like, well, yeah, perhaps it is. But more recently, in the past few years, somehow my perception of Edinburgh has flipped a little bit. I mean, Edinburgh is an incredibly gothic city, and it's a city that's very, very much enamoured of its gothic past, of the kind of gruesome things that happened there. I mean, the old town is extremely touristy. The Royal Mile is lined with tourist shops. I mean, these shops are selling, I mean, it's abysmal, the stuff that they sell. Interestingly enough to me, I mean, like Edinburgh is down, like, it's quite far down. It's not that far from the border with England, so it's fairly southerly as far as I'm concerned, because I live right up in the northwest. It's nowhere near the Highlands, yet these tourist tat shops, they're very Highlands inspired. There's a lot of tartan, a lot of Nessie, there's a lot of Highland cows, all that kind of stuff. Like, but they're just grim. But when you look beyond that, there's a lot to see. I've been down a couple of times. I'm recording this 2025. I've been down a couple of times in January and February this year. Went to different places. One of the places that I've been really, really, really wanting to visit for a long time was the Surgeons' Halls Museum. So Edinburgh has got a long association with surgery. And back in the early 19th century, bodies were in very short supply for dissection. They had a very limited range of people that they were legally allowed to dissect. People that had died in mental institutions, I think, was one. Orphans, foundlings, people who died in prison. but the training of surgeons, it was becoming like this booming trade, so there was a shortage of bodies. And the surgeons were paying £10 a body, which was quite a lot of dosh in those days. So people were inclined to start procuring bodies for the surgeons. Two of Edinburgh's most famous body snatchers, as these people were called, were Burke and Hare, both Irish immigrants. And they would go into the graveyards at night after a body had been buried, and they would dig it up, and then they would go and sell these to the surgeons for dissection. So obviously families got a wee bit upset about this, and they started, they would either pay somebody to guard the graves, or they would put this sort of like cage thing over the graves, or they would hire a big slab of stone which would like sit over the grave until the body would be, you know, too far gone to be, you know, not, it wasn't fresh enough for dissection. So as it became more difficult to dig up bodies, Burke and Hare took to procuring bodies for themselves, like i.e. murdering people. And it's estimated that round about 1828 that they murdered 16 people, and they then sold these bodies to the surgeons for dissection. So the Surgeons' Hall Museum, like it's got lots of body parts from dating from the 16th century, and they've got the death mask of William Burke. William Burke was hanged, and then he was publicly dissected, and they have his death mask, and you can see the where the rope went round his neck. And in that same cabinet there's a book. It looks like a leather bound book, and what it's actually bound with is the cured skin of William Burke. This is really, really gruesome, but absolutely fascinating. You're not allowed to take photographs in the Surgeons' Hall's Museum. I think it's like it's a respect thing, because everything you're looking at is it's been a real live person at some point. A lot to take in. I found it quite moving, quite disturbing in parts. Like it's quite an emotional thing. There's a lot to see there. I agree with not being allowed to take photographs in it, but very, very interesting. But just that whole thing about how it ties into Edinburgh's sort of Gothic past. One of my favourite authors, Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson, R.L. Stevenson, he's written some of the most famous books of all time. He wrote Treasure Island. Just about everything that's passed into legend about pirates came from Treasure Island, and he made most of it up. And of course he wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And when you're walking about Edinburgh, especially at night, and you're kind of like, you see these like steep streets and the really high buildings, and there is a kind of like deliciously Gothic sense around the place. It's quite creepy. Robert Louis Stevenson also wrote a short story called The Body Snatcher, which was inspired by Burke and Hare. But on the kind of more touristy side of things, there's some great places you can go and visit. One of them is called Mary King's Close. And this is a street in Edinburgh which was built upon. And so it kind of disappeared like for years and was uncovered. I think it was like in the 1990s. Some building works were going on, and like they discovered this really, really well preserved close. So the people that were in it didn't actually live underground. The whole thing was open, but what they did was they just kept building on top. So all of this was like covered over. And it's quite fascinating. They have it's actors that show you around and kind of reenact things. So it's full of things about the plague and how people lived, the horrible sort of living conditions. I don't know if you've heard the expression Gardy Lou. This was because they had no plumbing, they had no toilets. So there'd be entire families. There could be like 40 people living in quite a small room, a room about the size of the one that I'm sitting in just now, and these people were all living there together. Absolutely filthy conditions. And the buildings outside like were really, really high, and the streets were really narrow, so there was no sunlight getting down. I can just imagine they must have been absolutely rickets must have been absolutely rife, among other things. Anyway, the Gardyloo thing was twice a day at 7 a.m. in the morning and 10 p.m. at night. You would empty your bucket of waste out in the street inside, and it was quite a steep hill, so this would all kind of like run down. And whether you were on the ground floor or whether you were 4 or 5 stories up and chucking it out of the window, you shouted Gardyloo, which was basically watch out for the water. Water. So they were just throwing all their waste down into the street, and it was all kind of like rolling down, and it went into this loch, which is no longer there. It's now Princes Street Gardens. So just all of this filth. And when you were going through this place, you saw a room which was a byre. It was where they kept cattle, and I was just thinking with these poor animals, they had them tethered to the wall, and I don't think they were ever outside until they were being taken to be slaughtered. So these animals basically lived in darkness. I mean, candles, all that kind of stuff was quite expensive, so like I can't see them wasting too much light on a bunch of cows. And the stench just must have been absolutely atrocious. But when you go into Mary King's Close, you're imagining all of this, because these days it's a fairly cleaned up sort of experience that you're getting there. The streets are really steep, you get an idea of all of that. One of the things that I found really interesting about it was, I mean, the tenements that I'm used to, it's like they have what you call a close. You go in like this communal front door, and there's an internal staircase which leads up to everybody's front doors. But in the tenements in Mary King Street, they didn't have those internal stairs. The front doors were up on the outside of the building, and they built these kind of like rickety spiral metal staircases leading up to people's front doors. Yeah, health and safety hadn't been invented then. But yeah, I guess it was a touristy thing to go and do, but it was a very, very enjoyable and very interesting. And what we did to complement that, the following day we went on a tour of the Edinburgh vaults. I wouldn't say that one was better than the other. I thought that the two tours kind of really complemented each other. The vaults are under South Bridge in Edinburgh, so it's a big bridge, lots of arches. Only one of the arches is open, the rest are all kind of like built over. And in these vault rooms, people used to live. I think it was something like 2,500 people. And they were dank, they're still dank, it stinks down there. The guy that was leading us in the tour, he was called James, he was really funny, he was very enthusiastic, obviously loved his job. You're in there, it's very, very dark, there's a few candles around, and he sort of flashes his torch, and you kind of see that, like this dripping, horrible ceiling, and it's like this, like everything's this kind of vaulted thing. And apparently, like, as you can imagine, like crime would have been rife down there, it was really bad, and the authorities just decided that they would leave it alone because it was like too dangerous. The vaults were discovered back in the 1980s. We were taken into a room that had been a student bedroom in the 1980s, which is at the time that I was a student, and like, yeah, I wasn't in Edinburgh, I was in Dundee, and I was living in some pretty slummish conditions, but I don't think they were as bad as this place. Anyway, this bunch of students, they're getting drunk one night, and they're hearing this kind of scratching behind the wall, and as you do, they took a hammer to the wall to knock through to find out what was going on. Found a secret passage, turned out to be a passage into this whole vault system, which had kind of just been built over and forgotten about. One vault we were taking into had a stone circle, and someone had spent a night in the vault and apparently had experienced some kind of presence which they had then captured and was supposed to be held within this stone circle. The guy James was telling us all the story about this, and it was great. It was creepy, and we were all lapping it up. And then you were given the opportunity to step into the circle. Now, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. Some people just kind of leapt in straight away, but you know, like what went through my head was there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. I don't admit this very often, but I've had a couple of what you might call experiences. I don't know, like things that I haven't understood. I've seen things, I've felt presences, things have happened. I don't like to dwell on it. I just feel as if there are more things than we're aware of, and like maybe there's a logical explanation for all of it, but I am not going to be tempting any fate by stepping into like a stone circle that's supposed to contain some kind of horrible presence. Like Edinburgh, the whole Burke and Hare thing, there's something, I don't know how this is going to come out, I don't know how it's going to manifest itself, but there's something there that I really kind of like. I like this thing about like people all living in these living in layers, deep layers of people. And something about all of that going on with that mad, garish, touristy thing all happening in top of it. So yeah, where do you get your ideas? I think I've probably got quite a lot of ideas from Edinburgh. As I said, how these will manifest, I don't know, but my writing plans, I've got a book to write this year. It's called Ugly in the Dark. It's going to be published by Outcast Press. Other than that, my main writing focus is going to be short stories. And I think this is going to give me a chance to kind of like play around with all of these ideas. So there you go. Where do you get your ideas? Body snatchers from the 19th century. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time on Author Talk. Another place I went to visit was the Museum of Childhood, which is slap bang in the middle of the Royal Mile's like tourist zone. I mean, like, is there anything more gothic than a Victorian doll? I mean, check these things out. I mean, like, it's the stuff of nightmares.